So the CDC has again released new guidelines on how cruise lines must conduct test sailings before they can again take paying passengers. Let's talk about it right after this. Chris here with High Seas Cruising, and welcome to another cruise news video. Before we get started, please hit that subscribe button. Free to do so, helps our channel, and allows us to continue bringing you cruising content. So according to the CDC, cruise ships that want to now conduct test sailings have all the necessary information and requirements to do so. First, the cruise lines have to request a test sailing 30 days in advance, and the CDC will respond to that request within 5 days. The request has to include the location that the cruise ship's going to be going to, the dates that it's going to be sailing on, and the multi-port agreement between the ports and medical facilities of any stop the cruise ship plans to make. Now, the CDC also released the guidelines and the requirements for the actual test sailing itself, what's going to be required on board. Now, this is quite a list, so we're going to go ahead and get started with that. All right, cruise lines will need to test embarkation and disembarkation procedures as approved by U.S. port and local health authorities as part of the cruise ship operators Phase 2A agreements, including procedures for terminal check-in. Cruise lines will need to run all regular onboard activities, including seating and meal service at dining and entertainment venues. Passengers will take part in medical evacuation procedures. The cruise operator will also need to simulate the transfer of symptomatic passengers or crew or those who test positive for SARS-CoV-2 from cabins to isolation rooms, onboard and shoreside isolation and quarantine as per the terms of the cruise ship operators Phase 2A agreements of at least 5% of all passengers and non-essential crew. So they're going to simulate an outbreak on board the ship. 5% of the passengers and non-essential crew are going to get COVID, basically, isolated to the room. They're going to be transferred off the ship, quarantined, all simulated, of course. The cruise ship's not going to leave you anywhere if you're a volunteer. But let's keep going with this list. Recreational activities that the cruise ship operator intends to offer as part of any restricted passenger voyages, i.e. casinos, spa services, fitness classes, and gymnasiums. Private island shore excursions, if any are planned during restricted passenger voyages, the following measures must be observed on the private island. Only one ship can dock at an island at any one time. A routine screening testing protocol must be implemented for island staff who are expected to interact with volunteer passengers or crew. Mask use and social distancing must be observed on the island. Port of call shore excursions, if any, are planned during the restricted passenger voyages. The following measures must be observed on port of call shore excursions. Self-guided or independent exploration by passengers during port stops must be prohibited. Shore excursions must only include passengers and crew from the same ship. Cruise operator must ensure all shore excursion tour companies facilitate social distancing, mask wearing, and other COVID-19 public health measures throughout the tour. And cruise ship operators must have a protocol for managing persons with COVID-19 and close contacts at all foreign ports of call. So we've all heard the term cruise bubble or excursion bubble, and that's what this is referring to here. It will be very specific shore excursions only through the cruise lines during these test cruises, and you won't have any opportunities to, of course, self-explore, choose your own excursion, or wander off on your own. All right, the minimum number of required volunteer passengers for each simulated voyage must be at least 10% of the maximum number of passengers permitted on board for restricted voyages. The cruise ship operator must advise volunteer passengers of CDC's travel health notice for COVID-19 and cruise ship travel prior to the simulated voyage. At the cruise ship operator's discretion, This information can be provided via linking to the CDC's webpage, through email, or written letter to the volunteer passengers. So if a cruise ship intends to sail at reduced capacity with, say, 3,000 people, in order to do a test voyage, they're going to have at least a minimum of 300 volunteer passengers. All right, all volunteer passengers must be informed in writing that they are participating in a simulation of the health and safety protocols that are unproven and untested in the United States for purpose of simulating a cruise ship voyage, and that sailing during a pandemic is an inherently risky activity. All volunteer passengers must be at least 18 years old or older on the day of the simulation and at the time that their consent to participate is obtained. The cruise ship operator must ensure that all volunteer passengers have either proof of being fully vaccinated against COVID-19 using a Food and Drug Administration authorized vaccine, or a vaccine product that has received emergency use listing from the World Health Organization, or, if not fully vaccinated, written documentation from a healthcare provider or self-certified statement that the volunteer passenger has no medical conditions that would place the volunteer at high risk for severe COVID-19 as determined through CDC guidance. So according to the CDC, you do not have to be fully vaccinated in order to be a volunteer on a simulated test cruise. You just need written documentation saying that you're not at high risk. Now, whether the cruise lines will accept that, or they even may want the volunteers to be vaccinated just for safety's sake, that seems like a more logical choice, simply because if you have unvaccinated people on a test cruise, something happens while the CDC's on board. I don't know. I don't know how the cruise lines would feel about that. We'll have to see what they're going to do. The simulation must be conducted with the signed informed consent of all participants and not as a condition of employment or in exchange for consideration or future reward. All volunteer passengers must be evaluated for signs and symptoms of COVID-19 prior to embarkation and disembarkation. Cruise ship operators must educate all volunteer passengers about the signs and symptoms of COVID-19 and the need to notify cruise ship medical staff immediately if symptoms develop. And finally, all volunteer passengers must agree in writing to post-disembarkation specimen collection for COVID-19 testing at 3 to 5 days after completion of the simulated voyage. Cruise ship operators are advised that as a condition of receiving a COVID-19 conditional sailing certificate, at least 75% of all volunteer passengers must provide their post-disembarkation specimen to the selected laboratory. So if 75% of the test subjects do not submit their specimen, the cruise ship cannot receive authorization to start sailing, and it sounds like they would actually have to do the test sailing again. So I am curious to see what the cruise lines will say about this one, if this is something they're going to want to make sure the volunteers do in order to receive that sailing certificate. And this may be one of those cases where they may try to use crew members from other ships as the volunteers, because at least then they know where they are and can collect those samples 3 to 5 days later. The CDC also has a couple of additional requirements, and they are requiring the elimination of any self-service food or drink stations, such as buffets, salad bars, and of course the drink stations. They will have to be served to you by the crew. That's not really any big surprise. The cruise lines have been talking about that for a while now, and the majority of cruise lines have already eliminated self-service buffets. So after going through this list, honestly, there is no big surprise here. These are the things that the cruise lines and the cruise experts and the CDC have been talking about would be requirements for test sailings pretty much all along. But the real question is, are cruise lines actually going to do any of this or actually do any test sailings? Let's be honest. They have not had revenue generating sailings here in the United States for 14 months. So they now have two options. They can do these test sailings. Now keep in mind, these test sailings, the cruise lines are paying for. They got to pay for the sailings. They got to pay any port fees anywhere they go. They're paying for the excursions. The volunteers are sailing for free. And according to this list, everything has to be open. So they have to have the casinos, the spas, the gyms, the shows, the bars, which means they have to have employees on the ship to work those venues. All more money that the cruise lines have to hemorrhage up in order to even do these test sailings. Or they can sail immediately with vaccinations. 98% of the crew, 95% of the passengers, a multi-port agreement, and they can probably start sailing by July. Or they can do these test sailings. Honestly, from a business standpoint, they're probably going to go vaccines first. They may try to do some test sailings because not everybody can get a vaccine. Some people have medical reasons why they can't get it. Some people probably just don't want to get it. And the cruise lines are not going to want to alienate anybody if they can at all help it, but they do have to get back to revenue generating sailings right now. As soon as possible, they just cannot afford to continue losing money. So while we may see some test sailings from cruise lines, I do expect the majority of them to start fully vaccinated. I know there's a question about even children being on board because anyone under the age of 16 cannot be vaccinated as of yet. But honestly, with sailings beginning towards mid to end of July, that's kind of the end of the summer season. And that is about the time where the dynamics shift on the ship. You have less families versus more adults as kids get ready to go back to school. And I'm pretty sure the cruise lines are considering that when they're making their decision, but we're going to have to wait and see. So what do you think? Do you think the cruise lines are going to go through all of these procedures in order to do test sailings? Or do you think they're going to head towards vaccinated cruises first? Let me know what you think below. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, let's give it a thumbs up. Have yourself a great day, and we will see you out on the high seas.